Hi, everyone. I'm Trisha Bell,
Hi, I'm Georgia Young.
and welcome to CTE Talk, the podcast where we talk all about CTE, concussion culture in sport, and life as a family member.
Every Monday, we will be joined by guests to shed light on the neurological disease, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Join us on our mission to raise awareness and educate others. And welcome back to CTE Talk. Today is actually the final episode of Series 1. What a great way to end this season by being joined with the lovely Chuck and Mary Hansen, who are coming on today to share their son's Evan's CTE story. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to introduce everyone and tell your story?
Sure. I'm Chuck Hansen. This is my wife, Mary, and our CTE story is with our son Evan. He played American football for. He was in his 14th year. He was a senior in college at Wabash College, Division III football program, and he was a starter all 4 years, and he was a captain of the football team. And then in 2018, after the second game, they had won. That was on a Saturday, and then 2 days later, he took his own life. And so that's kind of the quick story of Evan. What happened. Probably all these stories are a little bit more complicated than that, but it took over a year before, just due to the backlog of brains that are being tested at Boston University, it took over a year before we definitively got the answer that he did have CTE. And there's obviously 14 years of football. He was often played both ways. He in high school was a running back and a linebacker. So then even in college, he was a starter as a freshman in a middle linebacker. So he obviously had a lot of impacts to his head over the years, and who knows how many small concussions he had, just because he was not the kind of person to kind of talk about those things, or to complain about those kind of injuries. He just kind of had the mentality to play through them. So that's one of, I guess, one thing that's kind of unique in Evan's story is that he was still playing football, when he died, whereas a lot of times it might be a year or two or 10 or 20 years later that symptoms start to get worse and worse. But for Evan, it really was kind of the last couple of years of his life that things got suddenly much more challenging in school and in life. And even though he had a lot to live for, and strong community and family, and he was in fraternity and captain of the football team, and very popular young man, and something obviously very challenging came up that at that point in time he wasn't able to handle it. But now, as we're learning through Concussion Legacy Foundation and other people from around the world, we realize that Evan's story isn't that unique. There's just a lot of people suffering later in life after getting lots of impacts to the head, growing up, particularly playing sports, whether it's football or soccer or hockey or rugby, Australian rules football, right? They all we now know can have some very negative side effects, long-term permanent side effects to people's brains. So I don't know, Mary, did you have anything, what else you wanted to add about Evan's story?
Well, I guess part of the issue in the beginning was that when he said he was depressed, it was a little bit strange, but on the other hand, we had mental illness on both sides of our families. So my first thought wasn't that he had a brain injury. It was just maybe he was at a point in his life where things were getting more challenging, or I don't know. You know how mental illness is. Sometimes you have a trigger and then, there you are. So we started him on some different medicines. And unfortunately, because he was kind of tough, he kept taking this antidepressant. And when I told my sister, who's been on meds for like 25 years, she said he should have never been on that medicine because it gave him like a stomach ache, and he was having to eat like different types of foods. And he didn't share any of that with us until much later. Like he had been on that medicine probably for about, I don't know, 6 or 7 months before he shared that with us. And apparently that is not good, right? Like if you're taking some kind of antidepressant and you have physical manifestations of that, then that means your body is not. So that's the real downside of having any kind of medical issue happening in a college situation, because you're not really there being able to know what's going on. So long story short, by the time he was back in his senior year, we were trying to get him to take a test, and I think they take your saliva, and then they're able to recommend an antidepressant that works better for your body. And a couple of
I
my
remember that.
said it totally changed their kids' lives. So because Evan was in Spain and then he came back, to the States, we were trying to get all this done and we were having problems getting it done. So they put him on, what was it? They put him on something else at Wabash. There's that one that did have a high suicide rate. Zimbalta. So apparently they felt like he needed something. And so we did that.
That's a strong drug, yeah.
Right. So he did that one. And I'm not saying that it was like what did it, but you kind of wonder, because it does, if you read the fine print for his age group, it has a very high suicide rate. So the other thing that I was working on, and this was the Friday before he died, I said, we are definitely not making any progress fast. And so I said, what other reasons would you be depressed or whatever? And I contacted a doctor at IU about traumatic brain injury, because like, what do they give people that have traumatic brain injuries? And a lot of times they give them steroids or, something like that. So I had a phone call into that doctor on Friday, and needless to say, I didn't get a response. And then not that it would have made a difference, but then I had to tell them, well, he actually died on Monday. And so, but I think that we were actually finally getting closer to understanding more what was going on at that moment in time.
Wow. So how long was Evan having the depression? Like did you notice changes, or what age did that start going on?
It was just like a year to year and a half before he died. So he was 20 at the time. So growing up, he never had any issues like that. And good student, obviously successful, had lots of friends, lots of good things going on. He was already making plans to go to school after college, probably to do a physician's assistant or a nursing program or something along those lines. So those plans he was actively working on that.
And even he didn't really want to tell us that he was depressed, because he's like, I really don't understand it, but his girlfriend forced him to tell us, his girlfriend at the time. And I'm not exactly sure why he didn't want to mention it, but whatever. And that's how we kind of found out about it. So I guess it was a blessing that she actually said something at that point in time.
But he had kind of bounced back the spring and summer before he died. He died in the fall. Obviously, September was beginning of football season. So he was, we thought, on the upswing. So for things to go so terribly wrong so quickly was definitely a surprise to us. So I mean, yeah. So he didn't share a lot about that. Definitely there can be an attitude in sports, and particularly football, and particularly with Evan, you just play through things. So whether you have knee surgeries or problems with your neck or back, or your shoulder pops out of socket, or first practice that he broke his
they're
finger.
very tough.
He broke his finger the first day of practice, so he didn't want to miss his senior season. So he should have had surgery, but they just taped it to his other finger every game. And you're a linebacker, so you're using your hands all the time. So basically every practice, every game, you're just fighting through injuries and whatnot. And so obviously that's part of the game. So unfortunately, there's some things like brain injuries that we now know those aren't things you try to tough your way through those. It's a different category of issues. When physical pain, I guess, is one thing, but mental anguish or instability, difficulties, that's a completely different category that people should not try to push through by themselves. Right?
And the thing is about mental illness and things like that, and brain injuries, is that it's invisible, and that's what's so hard about CTE as well. It's an invisible disease. So you've got these strong, tough athletes that actually they look perfect from the outside, but they're really struggling from the inside. And I think when you mentioned about how he didn't actually mention about his depression, I think mental illness is really hard to disclose to people, especially when you can't put a finger on yourself of what is the trigger or what has caused it. And if there's no reason, you almost start to blame yourself and start thinking, well, why do I feel like this? And I think it's really tough when it's kind of in that sense. I just wondered, obviously, when the symptoms started showing, and you mentioned how there's mental illness on both sides of your family, so you went down that route first. Did CTE ever come up, or had you heard of it? I just wondered what your kind of background was on that information.
Not.
I would say
if there was
no.
anything, it would have been a pretty minor issue as far as like the doctors and his treatment going there. There was nothing special because of all the sports and football that he had played. So, and as far as CTE, that was something that I think maybe at that time the concussion movie had just come out roughly around that time, and I had not seen it, but I heard of it. But
I guess, yeah, the other thing that was kind of interesting was that the timing of everything was just perfect, because we didn't really know about the CTE, and because of the social media and the fact that he was a beta, we were able to actually get his brain donated, because I did tell Chuck that I wanted his brain donated. Like when we found out that he was dead, I said that brain needs to be analyzed. So I knew that I wanted it looked at. And then the coroner said that he couldn't get enough pieces together to be able to donate it. But then I think Chris Nowinski contacted us and contacted the coroner and said, hey, we've taken really, really tiny pieces of brain and we've been able to analyze it. So we need you to send us what you can send us. But now we realize that there's only a 24-hour window. So I'm really grateful that we were able to have that conversation with Concussion Legacy Foundation, because we did not know about the 24-hour window. And obviously we were having trouble with the coroner wanting to do what we were asking him to do.
Oh,
And
so
even if
had
you-
you heard
yeah.
of?
Sorry,
Oh,
go
go
on,
ahead.
Trisha. No, you go.
Had you heard of Concussion Legacy Foundation before Evan passed? No. Wow.
yeah.
So, but you knew his brain needs to be analyzed, and you're like, I'm gonna find some money to analyze it.
I think like the concussion movie, that was really talking more about NFL players, and maybe 10, 20, 30 years after you're done with the NFL was kind of, and not, there was less focus on college age, or,
Right.
and now we know that there are a lot of college football players that maybe have, maybe not advanced levels, but the stage one, especially the beginnings of CTE, and it's true that CTE, I mean, it is one disease that is caused by this, but I think the whole issue is a lot more complicated than that. There's just a lot of things that go on in the brain, whether it's Lou Gehrig's disease, or Parkinson's, or Lewy body disease, or white matter damage, and all these other things that are happening kind of in parallel with CTE. And whether it's the CTE that causes these problems, or it's CT and something else that's causing, for example, in young men, and particularly that play football, why there's kind of that group of young men in their 20s that are having such problems. Then there's kind of the secondary group that it happens later in life, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, when they start having more advanced, stage 3 and 4 versions of CTE. But it's definitely a complicated issue. And George, I think you even talk about mental health being inside your head. Well, obviously all these things that are physically happening to your brain are obviously all inside the skull. You can't look at these things directly while people are living. Even the scans are of limited benefit at this point, although they're making progress. And the other part of, it's one thing to break your finger, like Evan did on the first practice. Well, what happened. The finger broke. It happened because of this issue. CTE and these issues, they crop up years and tens, decades later at times for some people. So how do you backtrack to what actually caused it, right? Especially when you played football for so many years, or had other, activities perhaps. Tracing all that back is so complicated, and that's one reason why I think we're in the situation we are, is that it's not so obvious when someone blows out their knee, or that Buffalo Bills player who, Hanlon, I guess his name, you get hit and your heart stops. Well, it's pretty obviously what happened, right? I mean, whereas the CTE that's going on, and other brain damage is might not manifest itself up for years, or 20 years from now, but then it creeps up on people. It's like, what's going on? And that's what we're trying to get awareness of, that this is not an isolated incident. It happens much more than people think it does. It's just that it's so remote and difficult to diagnose because of it's inside your brain. It's kind of like we're literally seeing the tip of the iceberg. There's so much suffering and impacts of this disease that are all under the water, that just aren't made public, that people don't know about. Sometimes even the people suffering it maybe don't realize what's happening. And that's what we're trying to. That's what we're all trying to do, right? Is to bring awareness to this disease. How can we prevent it? How can we help people that may have it? What can we do in the future as far as diagnosing and treating, and what the symptoms, and moving all this forward. But it's such a big problem involving so many people now. In Georgia, this is a problem not just the United States, right? It's a problem that goes to Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Europe, South America, Brazil. This is getting attention now worldwide, which is huge, right? But and I guess we have to be happy with the direction it's going, even though we know that it should be going faster. But we know that there is progress being made.
Yeah, everything you've said is you've hit the nail on the head. And I think with humans, we're such visual beings that we look at someone with CTE and you can't see it, it's invisible. So we really struggle to understand it. And it's through individuals like yourselves, like talking about stories, that people can put the two and two together and really understand what's going on and what actually happens inside the brain as an effect of all these years of concussions. And also age is a big thing. And when you said that you hadn't really heard of CTE, even though that movie Concussion had come out, you might have heard some speculation. Again, no one knew at that point that people as young as Evan could have CTE. And I think that's, again, important to reiterate that CTE does not affect just older ex-NFL players. It can affect a range of people, a range of different ages. And it's so important to share the young stories for people to really put the two and two together. But you're so right. I mean, we definitely are stepping in the right direction. And I think all the research is obviously upcoming. And like you said, more and more people globally are understanding what CTE is. Hopefully one day we'll get to a point where it can be diagnosed in the living. But I still think that, obviously, I haven't personally gone through the situation myself, but I understand from the research side and speaking to people that nothing really does help. Like even the information and stuff, you might know what it could be, but the experience is so hard and the symptoms prevail in such different ways. It's so hard to navigate for the patient and also the family members too. So, but hopefully, like you said, one day we'll definitely get in a better position.
Well, the thing that's probably the most tragic about it all is that, for example, there was a younger boy that we knew that had been struggling for a few years with alcohol, apparently, and he wasn't able to go to school. And, his parents basically thought that he had alcohol issues. And we tried to get them to donate his brain and they wouldn't do it, because Chuck and I both thought that he probably had CTE because he was a football player, American football player, probably about the same number of years as Evan. And he was actually not playing in college, but he played rugby in high school. And he was probably self-medicating, right? So these people are either drinking, they're doing drugs.
They have depression. They have a bit of paranoia goes on sometimes.
And a lot of times they're just not nice to be around. And so.
Right. They have personality changes, very fast.
So then when there is a death, it's like, well, okay, that chapter's closed and people are just like, well, it's time to move on. And no one thinks about, well, their brain should be, let's understand what happened to the brain, just like for Aaron Hernandez, for example, obviously that's a complicated story, but to have this severe CTE that he had, that had to have some type of impact on some of the decisions he made,
Right, because there's that big impulse control is another big one in the 20s when the younger men get it.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely
which goes to the Aaron Hernandez. He's not making very good concrete decisions. Right? Yeah.
And I guess we have Evan was our middle son, so we had two other boys that played a lot of football too. So it was very important for me to know if he did have CTE, because our other kids could have CTE eventually. I mean, it could, right? If it's got a genetic component. And our older son actually was suicidal a couple years ago, and he did go through the process at Concussion Legacy Foundation, and they felt like, based on the questions that they asked him, that he didn't have CTE, that his was more just anxiety or some other kind of mental illness that, he's working on. but they did put him in contact with that one. He had like a peer mentor. I forget I think it was the one guy from Washington, University of Washington, that lost his brother. And so they were able to talk. I don't know how much they talk now, but so we did use that. What would you call that resource? The sibling resource. Because I think that not only are you sad that you lost your sibling, but you're kind of wondering, okay, when am I going to get CTE? Because even though I didn't play 14 years of football, I played 10. Or you know what I'm saying?
Yes, it's scary for the young, for any of these people that are just finding out about CTE and then realizing, oh wow, I've had a lot of concussions or a lot of impacts.
Right. And if you start talking to former football players about the issue of concussions and not reporting concussions, I don't know if there's any that don't admit to, well, yeah, I didn't report concussions I knew I had. I mean, it's almost it's kind of an epidemic.
It is. It's sadly, it's the culture, isn't it? I don't know. I know it's changing now, but I think especially athletes are told that they've got to be these strong individuals. They can't show any sign of weakness because it's going to impact the game, or it's going to impact the way they're perceived by their opponents. And I think that there's so many people that just kept their mouth shut, sadly, and they didn't get the right treatment. They didn't look after themselves. And now this is why we are in such an epidemic. But although it's changing now, and things like commentating and the way that the commentators speak about concussions, or if a player falls down or is knocked out, is kind of changing, there's still that stigma there, isn't it? Because I think the love of the game seems to be stronger than kind of the side effect or the effect that can happen as a result of all of those kind of impacts.
Right. And it was a former NFL player. I'm trying to remember at one of the events, but just what's the most important ability to have when you're an NFL player? And it's availability. I mean, you need to play, right? I mean, if you want to be here next week, next month, next year, you just have to play through stuff, and if not, then get on to your next career, because there's not room for people that are chronically injured or have the perception of being injured. And so you just learn to play through things. And
I remember my oldest son had a concussion, and I was in the office with the doctor, and it was the same week that Tim Tebow had a concussion, and the doctor was telling me that basically at the college level, even, he was sitting in a dark room all day long. Like, he wasn't allowed any kind of outside stimuli at all, lights, anything. I think he could eat, and that was about it, because they basically wanted him to be able to play by Saturday.
Yeah, it's so wrong, isn't it?
And at that point in time,
that's how they treated it.
Tim Tebow could say, well, I'm not going to do it. Now he probably would, but at the time then, I mean, he just did what they told him to do.
But the players want to play.
And the players do want to play.
The coaches want him to play. His teammates want him to play. The fans want him to play. So that's what happens.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't want to let anyone down. And you're right about the whole availability thing. I think when you're a sportsman or an athlete, you're so paranoid that if you take one game off, there's someone who's going to replace you and do a better job. So it's this whole competitive nature. And I think that relays, especially in this situation.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, unfortunately, it's true. You can get knocked out and get replaced, and your replacement starts playing really well. It's like, well, okay. It's an unfortunate reality of sometimes playing sports, but the reality of permanent brain injury, I think it's one thing. I think athletes have a certain sense like, oh, well, yeah, in 30 years, maybe I have to get my knee replaced, or I'll have to get, my shoulder done, or what, but hopefully technology will improve in the next 30 years. Right. But they don't factor in what it does to your brain. And the brain really defines who you are. It's how you think, it's how you relate to the world, it's how you relate to other people, it's how you enjoy things, it's how you learn things, right? And if that's not working right, then none of the rest matters. If your brain isn't healthy and functioning properly, there's really nothing worse that can happen to you, right? And that's I think something that they don't factor in to the long-term risks. I think people know about, okay, well, I might have some knee problems, so I'll be hobbling around a little bit, but for all the glory and money that I got, I'm willing to trade that off, you know. But people really, just because those stories of people suffering and kind of locking themselves away, you don't hear those stories because they're locked away, or they're not in the news, they're not in social media, they're not, you know, the NFL on CBS, they don't run stories about those players that are living in a hotel somewhere with these issues, right? I mean, you just don't. We now know that they're out there. It's just that you don't hear about them, and so it doesn't. I think the current round of players just don't even know that that's like something they should be thinking about, you know, as a possibility down the road.
But I do think, like Andrew Luck, he retired as a Colts quarterback, and I think he probably wanted to protect his brain. He didn't say that. He just said he retired. And there were a lot of people that were critical of him leaving. So you've got that side of it too, right? Like you make the decision that, okay, I am going to protect my brain. Who is that Wisconsin player? Boland?
There's
Chris
been a
Borland.
few over the year, like
Borland,
the last
Borland
5 years.
left. Yeah, there's
I
more.
think there's more. And I mean, we all love the NFL and big time Saturday college football. I mean, so I think that the goal is, how can we keep that by changing the rules, changing the practice, really scaling back at younger ages, you know, kindergarten through 13, 14 years old shouldn't be playing tackle football. They shouldn't be heading soccer balls. They shouldn't be, you know, having full contact in hockey or rugby or whatnot at that age. Because if you get rid of those years, you know, Evan's 14 years drops to 6 or 7 or 8 years, right? And then if you change practice schedules where the majority of hits happen in practice, and you change some things about how the game is played, and you see that they're making some changes already. Well, now the 20,000 hits that Evan got maybe would go down to 8,000. Well, maybe that would be, maybe he could have worked through that, right? You know, it's just how because realistically the NFL's not going anywhere, right? At least not in
There's not
the
enough
near future.
There's not enough evidence that every single person that plays football is going to get CTE.
Right.
So I think we have to try to keep that, you know, the parts that people love, but make the changes that help protect the players. And I mean, I've been to many NFL practices, you know, as an observer over the years, and I mean, the last couple of years I've been to NFL here in Indianapolis and in Green Bay. I didn't see anyone hit anybody in the entire practice. I mean, they realize that they need to protect themselves, and the NFL has to protect the players. So there's very limited amounts of just, you know, pad cracking and head cracking and what in practice, right? It's also scaled back. I mean, they're doing things, but without the risk to the players. And there's no way that was like that 20 years ago or 40 years ago. I mean, it was a meat grinder in practice.
But it's also the younger groups, right? Like if you watch some of these shows where they're going into the hood and they're starting these like football leagues and everything, it's very challenging for these mothers, I'm sure, because they would rather have their kid involved in something like Pee Wee football than running the streets and doing nothing. So then it becomes, are those coaches doing what they need to do to keep the game safe, right? Because
Yeah.
I've seen
Wow,
some of those
so many.
shows where you're kind of like, okay, how much do these guys actually know about the damaging side of football, right? Like they're out there trying to get the boys to do what they need to do and win games and this and that.
And that's that younger, right? The younger leagues. The coaches are most times dads. They don't know about concussions and neurological impacts. The players, obviously, they're 10 years old. They don't know anything. There's no doctors or what have you, sideline staff to help. So it's kind of a wild west when it comes to protecting kids' brains at that age. Whereas once you start getting in even to high school and obviously above that, then you do have trainers and the, team doctors and things like that to bring some kind of information and diagnosing skills, to practices and games. So that's why I think the Concussion Legacy Foundation, that's one thing they are pushing is youth football. Let's make a transition, and a lot of this is happening, is already happening. Transition more to flag football. Get rid of heading. Get rid. In soccer or football, cross-checking in hockey, all these kind of things at a certain age, so that there still is the ability for people to play at the higher levels. First of all, they have the decision whether they want to play or not. 18-year-old has more, or a 16-year-old or a 20-year-old has more of the ability to make a decision than a 8-year-old or a 10-year-old. They're just doing what their parents tell them or their friends want them to do.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big step is trying to realize that the NFL is not going anywhere, and not that we want it to go away. I mean, it's a lot of fun to watch and so on, but how can we keep that, but at the same time protect the millions of kids that are playing sports, and putting themselves now, we know, at risk for long-term health, mental health issues and brain function later in life. And people that haven't gone through it don't realize, how life can turn into kind of a living hell when brains stop working properly.
I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but I know I have. You'll hear a story about like a shooting. It was Rock Hill, South Carolina, because that's kind of where I went to school in that part of the country. My sister and I said, I bet that guy has CTE because he was a former football player. And sure enough, about a year later, they announced that, yes, he was positive for CTE. So you start seeing these stories in the news and you connect the dots a lot better, right? If you're aware of it, it doesn't make it good or bad. It just shows that there is an awareness and almost like a path that these stories tend to end up. And I mean, sometimes, as sad as I am that, Evan is gone, I'm like, could he have killed somebody, gone on a shooting spree like this guy, and then we would have a totally different story.
Sure.
Than
it's the unknown what's scary, isn't it? It's the unknown, and everyone's story is so different. Everyone's behaviors are so different from the same disease. So it's really hard to put the two and two together. And like you said, you just don't know what way it's going to go.
So, I mean, in this situation, as bad as it was to lose him, there wasn't really anybody else that he destroyed, as a part of his disease.
Yeah.
To me, it's so crazy, though, because I know we've collectively said that the NFL's going nowhere, but I wonder what they're so scared of. Why are they so scared of people coming out and talking about CTE, and they don't really say much about it? So to me, it's just so bizarre that we know that most people are still going to support the NFL. There's still going to be people that want to play. So it's just, it's so strange that kind of there's no comment from them, or there's nothing that they're proactively, I guess, doing about CTE. But maybe it's just because people are, I don't know, they're scared, or again, it's the whole thing of the unknown. People don't know what it's going to do to the reputation of them.
Right. It's definitely a culture thing. It is a money thing too, right? I mean, the NFL is, churning out billions of dollars for a lot of people, right? Whether it's the networks, the teams, the owners, the cities, no one wants that to stop. So I think there's just fear of what acknowledging this is doing to certain players. Because there's a lot they could do. I mean, this impact of, that's why the NCAA, for example, was formed, was to try to protect college athletes that were dying playing football. And you can go to the NCAA website and it says right there, that's why they were formed. And so 100 years later, we still have college football players dying. And, but college, Division I football, I mean, how much money are they generating now? It's the NCAA is a money machine more than an athlete protection, organization, right? I mean, they've transitioned away from that. So
now I know that, like, when we've had conversations with Evan's high school coaches, they honestly felt like they were doing everything they could to make the game safe. I mean, they really did. And so
That's good to know.
It really broke their hearts as much as ours, right? They're like, we're going to practice, think we're doing everything. And they also said that sometimes they feel like we could be doing the right thing, like stepping up, right, and being leaders and running our practices this way and that way. But then in the back of their minds too, it's like, well, what are the other teams doing? So if they're not following all of the protocols that we are we going to end up getting beat? And I think that that's the level of experimentation that at the high school level, they have to prove to themselves that we can do less hitting, we can do less this, we can do less that, we can do more of this, more of that, and we can still maintain a very competitive championship type of program. That's kind of what I heard from them as far as the transition goes, because in our area, we actually have had two football players, Evan and his friend Trace, and they both went to the same high school, and they're both dead. And poor Trace, they don't even know what he died of. They just say it was white matter.
It was neurological.
It's neurological, but they don't have a name for it. So we've got two young boys, right? And it really shook the football leagues around here, because they started having to combine Catholic schools because they didn't have enough kids from each school to form teams. So, I mean, I think that there are things happening. It might just not be happening as fast as we want it to happen.
I think that's a result of the parents stepping up.
Right.
Yeah, if kids aren't showing up to play, football as a 10-year-old, well, that's the parents getting involved. I think the NFL is doing certain things. I think they just kind of do it behind the scenes. Just from what I've seen, there are some rule changes. There are the way they do practices is quite a bit of difference. I think the NFL Players Association is lobbied for a lot of that. It seems like less of it has trickled down to college, and then once you get to the high school and lower levels, it's like, a little bit like the Wild West again. I mean, schools do what they want to do, and coaches do what they want to do, and there's no, the high school associations could start working to try to control the number of impacts that players get throughout the year. To my knowledge, they haven't done that yet. And again, younger age, it's probably just more appropriate to have football, like flag football, and just reduce those number of impacts that happen up to a certain age. And then when the athletes are more athletic and can make their own decisions, they can decide to what sports they want to play and how they want to play them.
It's all of them small changes, isn't it, that hopefully will make a bigger picture and a bigger change one day. And we want, like you said, individuals to be able to make their own decision before they can't, or their brain is too damaged for them to be able to kind of even comprehend what the decisions were to be made. So I think that's what's key, and that comes with education and awareness and sharing your story. And I think that's what people really want to hear. They want to hear, as hard as they are to tell, I can imagine, they want to hear the real life stories, because that's where you get the most understanding from.
Right.
Exactly.
And youth sports, there's so many good things that come out of, even, youth football. There's a lot of good things that come out of it. It's just that, how can we keep the good things and get rid of the part that may cause permanent long-term damage to people? It's not like get rid of all sports and have nothing that's challenging. There's a lot of things. Running a marathon is hard. It doesn't involve smashing your head against the wall, right? There's a lot of things that are very challenging physically that you have to be very tough to do, and it gives you discipline that don't involve permanently damaging your brain, right? And that's what we're trying to kind of communicate to parents. Because youth sports are fun for and beneficial for the kids. They're also fun for the parents. It's fun when your children are playing different sports and you see them succeed and having a positive experience. So, I mean, the one thing to be a parent, though, is just to realize what's best for them, and your entertainment and satisfaction is secondary when it comes to the health of your children.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, there's people that you tell, like I tell the story to, and their kid's gonna, continue on and play college football. And I mean, that's their choice, right? I mean, you can just share your story and people take what they want and leave what they want. And I mean, I don't think anybody that I've actually talked to has changed their mind. We have family members that, like, my nephews are not playing tackle football because they're younger. They played flag all the way through 8th grade. My brother was able
that's good.
Right. So, I mean, somebody has to take the leadership role and say, okay, my kid's not going to play flag or tackle, but he's going to play flag. Do you guys want to come play flag with us over at this? Right. I mean, it takes that kind of leadership to get people to say, oh, 7-on-7 can be really fun. You don't have to be putting pads all the time. And because a lot of it is about the costuming of it, right? They have the idea that they want to wear the helmet, they want to wear the jerseys, they want to feel big and tough at 3rd grade. I mean, I saw it happen in my own house. And then there's that certain camaraderie about it. And that's the thing about football, right? It's like, and that's why it's so hard, I think, for some of these people, including Evan, to say, I'm not going to play anymore.
Yes. It becomes such a part of them, especially that camaraderie. And the longer they play, the more of that they have. So,
I mean, I think he had pretty much decided that he wasn't going to play after college. So after he graduated, he was like, I'm done. Because I think he felt like his body was just, enough was enough. I didn't mean to interrupt. You were going to say something.
But even like a few weeks before that, I mean, he was still considering to play. For example, there's some European professional American football leagues. So he was strongly considering to do that. But I think maybe the last couple of weeks he just didn't think he wanted to do it anymore. But he loved playing football, and like I said, I think there's a lot of good things, and it's the NFL's not going anywhere. Big time college football is not going anywhere. So how can you keep that? If you want to keep that, then what do you have to change to keep that, right? And so maybe we need to change youth football and get high schools more in tune with changing practice and changing games to limit the amount of impacts. And it's not a sport you can ever 100% get rid of it, but we kind of know that it's a dose response. The more you get hit, the more years you play, the more likely you are to get CTE. That's what the research many years coming out of Boston University showed, that every year you play, it's 30% more chance that you're going to get CTE.
Well, I think if you look at like the Mannings, they never really played tackle football until junior high. So they were in that, 12, 13 year. Now, that didn't mean they didn't mess around like in the backyard, but as far as organized tackle football, they were, and I think Tom Brady was the same way. So there's seems like there's this window of time where all of a sudden more competitive type youth football leagues started, and they obviously took off, right, in a big way, because there's that window. Because I think right now, if you look at a lot of those NFL players, I don't think they're letting their kids play tackle football. I think they are having them play flag until they get older. Obviously, the one Manning is in college, right? Because he's in high school right now. But some of the younger ones, like Drew Brees' kids, and I think they talk about them playing flag football.
Wow, I didn't know that. So that's very interesting. Makes sense though.
I mean, if they would be a little more open about that, right? Like, okay, my kid's doing this, I think that you would have a lot more people that would probably consider it, right? But you've got so many people trying to. We were never guilty of this, even though we had really good athletes. We just wanted our kids to have fun. But you've got a lot of parents now that are looking for like a ride to college. And they think, oh, if I start my kid in football in first grade or whatever, he's going to be a college football player. Well, that is just crazy. They change so much. I mean, they really.
That's true.
Sadly, people don't listen until it's a bit too late. And I think what we want people to do is really listen to kind of what can happen if we aren't looking after our brains properly, if we are engaging in these high impact sports from a young age. And like we said, we're not trying to stop sport. We're not trying to change people's love for it. But if people can take away one thing from this conversation or learn one thing from it, then hopefully we can change kind of one person's education and awareness on it. And that should hopefully start a snowball effect, which I definitely think it has, because we've come such a long way from the past 10 plus years ago now. So hopefully that is an upward spiral in terms of getting more and more people to acknowledge CT and understand it, to stop the amount of individuals who probably have to experience it firsthand.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna actually wrap it up a little bit. I was gonna just thank you both for joining us, but go ahead and finish, because we can edit that out.
I guess the only thing I was going to say is there's plenty of sports that you can start at a younger age, or more cross training. That's what I keep hearing too, is you've got kids that are like having knee injuries at much younger ages because they're getting too focused on one sport. So like, for example, we have a good friend and he played, football in high school, but if you were a football player, you were also a wrestler in the winter. Like you did that. And then in the spring, I was thinking about Ted. Then didn't they play baseball in the spring or something? So they were being athletes, but they were being multi-sport athletes. For some reason now, everybody's got this idea that you need to like focus in on whatever your sport is at a very young age and just continue to play it. Well, it's really not been healthy for a lot of these kids. They're having a lot of injuries that they've never had before because they're working those same muscles instead of, cross training, right?
Alternating sports.
They're just doing year-round soccer, year-round basketball, year-round whatever. So that's another thing I think that it's just a change in mindset, right?
Mhm.
So like if you have in your mind that your kid is going to be football, then that's going to be a problem, right? Because they're just going to get that many more hits.
I think, yeah, the key to this conversation is you've got to be open-minded, and that playing football, like you said, is not the be all and end all. There is so many other opportunities that brings the same kind of effects that football bring, whether that's like the camaraderie, the teamwork, the athleticism, whatever it may be, the determination. Yeah, you can get that
Discipline.
in other avenues.
Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think it's even in the last 30, 40 years where youth sports has become such a business and such a high pressure, big time thing. I think, kids used to be more kids and weren't kind of exposed to this kind of big business youth sports kind of machine that's kind of been created. And in one hand, you can see why it happened, but on the other hand, it's probably swung too far. And we just need to step back and again go back to that question of how do we keep the good things in the sports, the camaraderie, the teamwork, the discipline, keeping kids out of trouble, giving them something to do, but improving them physically, helping them with teamwork. There's a lot of things you can do, and then get rid of the things that can cause them permanent lifetime hurdles and obstacles and difficulties, right? And let's keep the 90% of the good thing, and figure out how to let's get rid of that 10% or reduce it as much as possible. That's what we've learned.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for telling us kind of your story and Evan's story. And also, I think a lot of our listeners are going to be super interested in hearing your perspective in this whole culture change and the change in youth sports. I think it's going to give a lot of people a lot to consider. So thank you so much for coming in and sharing that with us today. We do really, really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you both so much.
We're happy to do it.
It's great that you're advocating.
It is.
Go ahead,
sharing
Georgia.
the legacy. I was going to say, and sharing the legacy, it's what's important. I was going to say, well, definitely, I'm looking forward to seeing you both in Vegas next year. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll all be there.
Yes, we'll all be there. It's going to be much bigger this year. I mean, next year, I'm sure too. So it'll go fast.
Well, good and bad, right? This would be great if there was like no need for any of us to do it anymore. But we're not. Yeah, we're not in that situation.
Yeah, it's like the best and the worst group to be in, isn't it?
Right, and I mean, even if we fix, youth sports today, there's still a pipeline of people that are going to be dealing with this, right? So the ability to diagnose it, treat it, even if you can put a name on it and understand it, I think it gives the people that are suffering go, okay, I know what's going on here. I can deal with it because at least I can put a name on it, and I have other people that have gone through this, and maybe for family members, like, why is that person acting that way? Or it's like, okay, well, now we have a reason, and then you can start looking at developing treatments and whatnot to try to, depending on the situation, to help people live with it, right, and improve their quality of life. But it's a big, it's not a problem that we're going to solve immediately. Just unless there's some kind of magic cure of being able to fix people's brains, which is 10 million times harder than preventing people's brains from getting injured in the first place, right? I mean, that's people want to take a pill and fix brain damage. It's like, well, that's hard.
It takes years and years to try to reverse any of that. So my dog is barking like crazy at the door. So can you guys hear that?
No,
I don't hear him. No.
Okay, good.
He said time's up.
Yeah, he's like, it's my time for my
Trisha's dog has been a feature in a lot of our episodes.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a big 85-pound boxer, and he thinks he's my little 2-pound baby or something. He was supposed to be my husband's emotional support dog.
Oh.
Yeah, Yeah, it
Does
didn't work out.
your
So now
dog help? Does the dog help at all with your husband or not really?
no, he's with me. My husband's in assisted living.
Right. But I didn't know if you could ever take like the dog to assisted living.
Well,
or...
he won't be around me, so no. I can't even go visit him or anything. Yeah. I wish we could, and I wish he would I wish he lived at a place like some of them allow dogs, but not a big, he would push the older people over. So
Right. Yeah.
But hopefully I'll be able to tell my story at some point,
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear it. Well,
It's wonderful, Chuck, that you know so much about the NFL stuff. Like, is it okay if I email you if I need to ask you a question? Because it seems like you're really up on all the CTE protocols.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. Why I used to like follow really. I had like this big list of all the CTE stories, and then it kind of got to about 200 or 300, 400 stories, and I'm like, that's what Google's for. I don't know. It's like so much stuff out there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like there's so much out there, and now with it especially spreading to rugby and Australian football and
yeah, we're gonna have a lady from Australia on here soon, and she was telling Georgia that they've just known about CTE for like what 3 months.
Yeah, this lady reached out to me on LinkedIn. She was like, "Oh, I saw the research you're doing or whatever," and she was like, "Oh yeah, we only heard about CT like 4 months ago, and her husband is struggling with symptoms." And to me, it was just so crazy. But like you said, it's important that it's kind of globally more people are becoming aware of it.
And just and like I said, that the injury to your brain, it changes who you are, right? It just
it changes your personality. It makes you a Jekyll and Hyde.
It's a different identity completely.
How you perceive the world, how others perceive you.
I've heard other wives say that it felt like they were living with somebody that had multiple personality disorder. It's like, who's going to show up today?
Exactly.
It's going to be this person or that person. And I'm sure you saw that with Evan as well.
That is the end of today's episode, everybody. And that is the end of season 1 of CT Talk. Thank you so much for all of the support and all of the episodes. And also thank you to every single family member, doctor who came on and shared their story. We really do appreciate it. And we'll be back in the middle of May for season 2. So take care, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Bye.